Welcome back to the Battleboard project. If you watched the previous video, you know I'm putting together a battleboard to use with Song of Blades and Heroes, but the techniques we're going to use will work with any of your tabletop miniature war games that use this type of surface. Today we're going to work on a hill. Now, before we get to that, I did have a couple of questions that were posed to me in the Song of Blades and Heroes group. Wanted to go ahead and answer them. They were in regard to the battleboard itself. Someone asked about the bottom of the board. I did put 3/8 inch wood on there and attached it. That makes it sturdier. And someone asked what kind of glue I used to attach the base foam here to the board itself. Now, when I did it, I used white glue and then I put in some short drywall screws. Thinking back on it, liquid nails probably would have been a better choice. That's the kind of stuff you can get to hang mirrors on walls and things like that. But if you don't want to spend the money, you can use something like white glue, but you're going to have to make sure it gets down good and level, and I do recommend using the drywall screws, not standard wood screws. And also make sure those screws are short enough that they don't go, they can get all the way in and be flush with the bottom of the board, but don't go through your surface. Now today for the hill, just like last time, I used pink foam insulation, and I went ahead and cut the pieces out. I just couldn't imagine that anyone would want to watch me cutting foam. It's a very slow process. For this project, I used a foam cutter. Now, you don't have to buy one of these. If you don't want to spend the money, although this was only about 15 bucks, you can always just cut it with a box cutter and then do your shaping both with that and a rasp or sandpaper or a sanding block. But for me, this cutter was worth it. I really like the way it works, and at some point you'll see me using it. And there are heavier duty, more durable cutters out there. There's one that looks like a slingshot with the wire running through the top part. That's a little more expensive, but this one here, I got it at Hobby Lobby for like 15 bucks. It works well for what I'm trying to do. So, I chose how large I wanted my hill to be. Now, a lot of people on their battlefields will permanently attach these, especially if you have a large battlefield. Since this is only 3x3 or a little less, I wanted flexibility, so this way I can move it around or not use it at all. I drew out the shape I wanted on my pink foam insulation, and I cut it out, and at least in some places you'll see I angled it, gave it a nice slope, and I'll probably smooth that out even more. And then I went progressively smaller using, same technique. This one is angled. This one is going to be a little bit different. I cut it a little funkier. You'll see what we'll do when we get there. Now, one thing I did was to make sure to keep one section fairly vertical and fairly even. And I don't know that if I even have this aligned the way I want it to. But that's because we're going to do something very cool with that particular part. If I were in another project, I might make this section even larger, but I just want you to see the concept with what we're going to do here. So, once you have cut your foam, whether you use the rasp and the sand or if you cut it with a foam cutter, there will be little string bits and little uneven bits, so I'm going to smooth that off with sandpaper, and then we will work on joining them together. Alright, so we've done a little smoothing, knocked off the little stringy melted bits, and I also sanded the surface, just like we did with the first level of the battleboard. That's going to help things stick to it. So now we're going to put on the first layer. You can take sharp bits of toothpick. These are more like matchstick size, and I've just put a little point in the end of each, and I'm going to use these just to help this stay in position while the adhesive dries once we put on there. So I'm going to put a few of these in. And I'm going to put down my adhesive. I'm going to use the heavy duty stuff this time. This is not Liquid Nails brand, but same kind of stuff. And it shouldn't take a whole lot. This is pretty hardcore stuff. And then, just because I'm weird, I'm also going to run a little white glue around the bottom edge of this piece here. So Now we're going to make sure it's aligned the way we want it. And press it down onto, that is not where I want it. See, good thing I checked. Press it down onto the sticks and the adhesive. And I don't know if you can see, but right here I was a little careless with my cutting. This one sticks out. So we're going to do a little trimming later to make sure it's exactly the way we want it. Now we're going to do the same thing with this smaller piece, and it too is going to need a little trimming. It's going to go roughly like that. A couple of sticks. Bit of adhesive. Bead of glue around the bottom. Me making a mess. And then press it down, get that adhesive spread out a little. Alright, we're going to give that some time to dry, and we will come back and do a little shaping. So we've given it some time to dry. Now we're going to make a few minor adjustments. One thing I did notice, I got in a hurry. When I put down the adhesive, I didn't spread it out. And so there's some places where it doesn't meet the lower level. So I'm going to have to compensate for that by, when we get to this point, we'll run a bead of glue around it, shake in a little sand, and it should be fine. But right now I want to do just a little bit of trimming. Most of this is set up the way I want it, but this sticking out in a way I don't like, and these areas are a little too smooth and rounded. So I'm going to take my cutter, I've heated it up, and I am just going to do a little bit of trimming here. Now this is pretty easy, you just lay it on there and slice off the piece that you don't want. Now one thing to remember, don't get in a hurry with this, because if you push too hard, it's kind of flimsy, it could possibly break. So take your time on it. And we're going to go ahead and take this off too. And this thing gets pretty hot, so don't like get an itch and scratch your nose without thinking about it or something like that. So yeah, I got a little careless. I cut a little groove in there. It's another thing we'll fill up with some sand. Now up here, I'm just going to make some very small cuts in it here and there just to make it a little less regular. A few notches, a few marks, and I might even, you see we're getting these strings of melted. Might even get my box knife and do a little bit of manual trimming, excuse me. But anyway, that's the worst of it right there. We've brought this back to where it needs to be. So now we're going to talk about the back. I left this fairly straight and fairly even because I want to make a little bit of a sheer rock face here. And so we need to try to make it uniform. So I'm going to go through and I'm just going to carve it all up in the same way. And then we'll come back and manually add some details to make it look like a rocky area. But see how the top is kind of bending backward. This thing is not particularly sturdy, so you have to be patient when you use it. If this stuff gets goo on it, you just wipe it off on like some corrugated cardboard or something to get the gunk off of it. I like how it just flows through, slices the stuff off cleanly. You're not getting lots of little bits and chips and things like that like you would if you were carving it. Alright, so I've got this all fairly even, and again you see where I was careless and I left some openings. We're going to have to fill that in, but I've got something to work with now, so I'll take a second, get all these strings off that I've created, and then we will add a little detail to it. Alright, I don't know how well this is going to work with the camera and everything, but I'm going to give it a try. Basically, I want to take this section that once we touch it up and paint it is going to be kind of uniform. I want to make it not so uniform, so I'm just going to make small cuts in various places. We'll cut out little ridges, little indentations. One thing I've noticed is that styrofoam really dulls your razor blades quickly, so I'm going to need to replace this one pretty soon. So the goal is that it's going to look like it's one wall, but that little bits and pieces have broken out of it. So give it that rough look that a rock wall will have. Our other sections are going to be dirt and grass, but this we're going to go with make it a little stone just for variety's sake. And I think I might even go back and clean these up a little bit with the my little heated tool here. But this is just the general idea. Create your section that you want to have as a rock. Get it generally uniform, and then go back and add some imperfections and details. Next up, we're going to do a rock pile and a little bit of rubble. Going to use very simple white glue and these decorative stones. I think I found them at the dollar store. And not much to it. I'm just going to make a big pool of white glue here. Drop some rocks onto it. We can make this nice and thick. And let's add a little more. And add a few on top. And then these areas that are going to be too small for a miniature to stand on anyway, unless I'm playing like a really tiny scale, let's put just a couple, so it looks like, you know, there's been some rock slides and some erosion. We are actually, when we primer it, we're going to paint over these, and then we will brush them with the same stone color that we put here, so it's going to look more like it's part of the natural formation rather than leaving them these weird varieties, dark gray and brown. Alright, moving along, you can see I filled in my empty spots with some glue and sand and a few bits of gravel. I did my best back here. We'll just see how badly it turns out. And now we're going to give it a base coat. Anywhere that I'm planning on having rock, I'm going to paint it with flat black primer, and everything else will be with flat brown, and acrylic paint, not primer. So that'll serve as sort of a primer layer, but also up here it's going to be an adhesive as well. So the black paint, that will include these rock piles, and anywhere that we're going to turn into the cliff face. And we'll make sure to get it into the recesses. We don't want to cover it over with gray and have little pink caverns back in the back. That would look very odd. So I'm not going to make you watch me paint this thing, but you get the idea. We're just going to cover it over.